Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Sun of Views Schools podcast made by the students for students. Today with me, and I'm Albert Taveria, by the way, your host, is another host of beautiful people. The beautiful people being, as usual, Mr. McKean.
Hi guys, Mr. McKean, Head of English and Drama, and I'm joined with today...
Hi, I'm Prem. I have both Spanish and Indian backgrounds. You're a 12 student.
Hi, I'm Sofia. I have English. Well, I'm English, but my parents are Slovak and Hungarian.
And I'm Thomas, and I'm from year 13, and I'm part Italian and part Argentinian.
Excellent. And the reason why everybody's talking about their nationalities is because today's subject is what, Mr. McKean?
Today's subject is multiculturalism, and I... on that note, German-born to British parents, but I've lived in France and now here in Spain.
Right.
What about you?
Well, I am Spanish by nationality. My mother was Spanish and my dad was Nicaraguan. And yet I was raised in Spain, but pretty much as a foreigner. I didn't really adopt the Spanish culture till I was well into my mid-20s. So multiculturalism. I believe it was part of our audience that brought it up. Elsa?
Yeah.
Thought about that. And the reason for that is, I'm assuming it's because here at school, it's basically the way it goes, right? We're all from somewhere and, with different parents, different cultures. And how does that affect people in school?
Right. So, how do you guys find the fact that there are so many different cultures here at school? What kind of experiences do you have with your culture mixing with other cultures? Just to start with anything that comes off the top of your head, what would you say? And anyone can jump in there, I don't mind.
I feel like maybe having lived in 3 different countries, I feel like what mostly straight up comes to my mind is the difference between the level of education, right, and how... for example, doing international A-levels is still, for some countries, it might be easier than others, if that makes sense. Because, for example, in Abu Dhabi, where I lived, I feel like it was much easier. And then when I came here, it really shocked me at how higher the level of education is. But I feel like that's one of the main points that I would look at.
Okay, interesting. Sophia, what would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I think it's very interesting that there's lots of different cultures here, and then when you come here, you don't feel different, because I was before in England, and even though I am English, I was born there and I lived there apart from the last 2 years my whole life. I still sometimes felt like an outsider because my surname was a bit different and people couldn't pronounce it, or stuff that I did, for example, at home, it was different to what other people were doing. But then I come here and everyone's doing different stuff at home, everyone's talking different languages, and you just don't feel like an outsider, because in a way everyone's like an outsider, so then you can come together over that.
Right. And Prem, what would you like to say about your experience?
Well, I can definitely relate to that. I also have a quite difficult surname to pronounce, but the fact that there are lots of different cultures here, so you can relate to more people, learn from different cultures, and if there are people from your same culture, you can also relate to them, learn more. So I have Indian background, there are lots of Indians in this school,
right?
So it's also easier to adapt.
Right, I would agree with that too, and I think that's one of my favourite things about working here, is the fact that there are so many people from so many different places, and you get to hear those diverse voices and different perspectives, and that's really important, that we don't just have one voice coming through. I think that's much to the credit of the school. How have you guys found, for those of you that weren't born here or those of you that have come here, how have you found slotting into the lifestyle here in Spain?
Well, I feel because I was born in Argentina, but when I turned 1, we moved out to Bahrain. And I feel having lived in a non-Spanish country, all my life, I had no idea what it was like. And in Middle East, it's very strict and very different to here. And so moving here was it really opened my eyes. I didn't know that there was so much to living. And the freedom you have here is incredible. There's many things that I never would have thought of doing that you would not do in Abu Dhabi. And it's yeah, it's just very different. And it kind of shocked me, but it was easier for me to adapt in a way because I didn't really have any limits.
Right.
So I didn't have any difficulty.
Okay. Sophia, what about you?
I think it's like difficult to say which one I'd like which lifestyle I like better here or
Right.
in England, because there are both like benefits and like negatives to both. But I don't know, there are some things here which I could never even imagine in England, like looking out my window and I just see the sea right there, right in front of me, and it's like sunny every day basically, and you know, like, and having a swimming pool and being able to go swimming whenever I want, you know, stuff like this, I just like couldn't even imagine before.
Right, and Prem, you were born here, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how has it been growing up here, and now you've kind of been thrust into this extra international environment?
So I've actually liked it, and I think it has many benefits, like being born here, but also being raised by Indian parents.
Mhm.
So I get like benefits from both cultures, you know?
Right.
I can like enjoy benefits from the Spanish culture that I've been taught since little,
Mhm.
and both Indians.
Right.
So it's been good.
No, that's cool. That's cool. And what would you say to maybe a new student that's coming into the school? Like they're coming from a completely different culture. You know, is there anything that shocked you, or that you found interesting, or that you'd want them to know?
Cool.
That everyone is really unorganized. I don't know if this is a Spanish thing or maybe it's a Sunnyview thing, but when I was in England, it was like, there's going to be this event, it's happening in 2 months, and we already know what's happening exactly 2 months before. Here, it's like the day before and everything's changed, everyone's confused what's going on. Sometimes I come into school in the morning and, okay, you guys have got cross country today, and it's like, I don't know what sometimes is going on.
Okay, so to be prepared for anything, keep you on your toes, be prepared to live in the chaos. Okay, good. Thomas, what about you?
I feel like going back to what we said about adapting is, I feel like people might stress a lot about it.
Right.
When in reality, it's much easier to adapt to than what one would normally expect, I feel like. Because me, I remember when I moved here, I had no clue. I was very worried. I was very nervous. But the second I walked in, I was like, okay, it's not that bad.
Yeah, and you were pretty good about it. I remember when you came in, as I was your tutor, back then.
Yeah.
And I remember having that Teams conversation with you and your dad on the screen, and that is something I would suggest. I'd say, make sure you do ask questions, because those are not silly questions. You want to feel comfortable, and I think those are the kind of things that can help. Definitely. And Prem, what would you say to, obviously you live here, you've grown up here, to somebody coming into this environment, what would you suggest or say?
Well, the customs also, I think, very different from other countries. For example, here, I have many Spanish friends, and if you say you're going to meet at 5,
right.
you never meet at 5.
Uh-huh.
So everybody shows up minimum at 6. So that's also stuff you learn from time to time, how to adapt here, how people are.
Right. That's interesting. I think for me, I've seen that happen too. But then those are little things. I don't think it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of, you get used to that for sure. I'm never going back to the UK. I cannot see myself going back there, because here, I think the quality of life, is much better. But how would you guys now, imagine you were thrust into another culture or another environment. Imagine you're off to go studying, obviously Thomas next year, and Sofia and Prem, you've got another year, and then you'll be maybe off to somewhere. How do you think, with your experience here at Sunnyview, how do you think that will take you on to the next step?
I feel like, I don't know, it's part of me is I just want to stay in one place.
Right.
And just study. I am going to study here next year, so I'm not moving
okay.
out. But it's if I was forced to have to move out to a different culture, I feel part of me would just be oh, come on,
Yeah.
I just want to sit and stay. But I also wouldn't be too limited. I feel I would still enjoy it and try to find ways.
Right. Okay. And what about you two? Do you have anything to suggest about that, going into a new culture?
Well, I think
You can go.
that being lived here all my life, it would be hard to adapt to another culture, but
Right.
them too, they've already lived in various countries, so maybe it's easier for them to adapt. But for me, I think like my brother also lived here his entire life.
Yeah.
And he moved to Holland a year ago.
Okay.
And he found it quite hard to adapt there. So
Okay. All right.
it's interesting. So
Right.
maybe you have more experiences. It's easier to adapt.
Yeah, I suppose so. And I think for people your age too, like it's a very exciting but also a very stressful time too. So you've got all of these emotions and things like that going forward. How do you find? So this is more for Thomas and for Sofia. How did you find settling in?
Well, I mean, I know I didn't have too much of a problem with it because I was really happy coming here. But I feel like, for example, with my little sister,
Yeah.
she did not have a good time, and even sometimes now she still struggles to adapt. And I know that if she had the choice to go back to Abu Dhabi, she would definitely choose to go back. But I also feel like that's part of like the age at which you have to move,
Right.
and because like for when she moved. She was much younger, and so she was very close with her friends. But with me, I kind of understood it, and I understood why. So I feel like it's also the understanding that might affect it.
Right. Okay. Sophia?
For me, it was like a roller coaster. Like one moment I love it, the next moment I hate it. Like, I don't know, for example, it's sunnier and I love that, but then like I miss my old friends and I miss my old school and stuff like this. So it's hard to say, but I think I have adapted. Like, I don't wish that I could go back. Like I'm happy here and stuff, but I don't know. I think my life would have gone very differently if I stayed in England.
That's interesting. Albert, over to you. You are an ex-Sunnyview student too. Has it always been like this in terms of this very international melting pot?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, depending on the current world conflict, you get students from different places.
Right.
I think the big difference is, I think I mentioned this before, back in the 80s, when I was a young teenager, Sunnyview was very, very insular. We didn't really... the people you knew were the people at Sunnyview School. And we were specifically trained to leave the country as soon as we could. At that time, Spain was close to a third world country. It wasn't that... it looks like it had only been like maybe 10, 15 years since the dictatorship. And there wasn't really many opportunities here in Spain. So we said, become a lawyer, become a businessman back in the 80s, go work for Wall Street, earn your money. And so that's what we did. But we all came back. We realized at the moment we left, we were all dying to leave. And the moment we did, we just said, nothing like Spain. So practically, I think pretty much all the people I know that I was close to are back here in Spain now. And they have been for years and years.
Nice.
Yeah.
So then with that in mind, with Albert who's come back, do you guys see yourself living here in Spain in the future now that you've been here at Sunnyview? What do we think? Prem, let's start with you.
Well, I would definitely like to come back because like friends, family, so like get the experience of studying abroad, like learn to be independent. It's very important. And then obviously come back here but you don't know wherever you go, you don't know if you're gonna like it more there or here. You never know. But I definitely like my life here.
Good. Sophia?
I don't think so because I don't speak Spanish, and then that for me is like a big thing to be able to like go out into the streets and just hear people talk and understand what they're saying, and like I guess that as well, and then just some other stuff that just like small things, like for example Amazon deliveries are easier in the UK, just like
the priorities there, Sophia. I can see that very much.
Yeah, I think I would stay in the UK probably.
Okay.
But it would be nice to like come back to like visit my parents and stuff, but
I'm
just
sure they
live
would
in the
like
UK.
that.
Yeah.
I'm sure your parents would like you to come back to visit them, I'm sure. And your brothers as well.
Yeah.
Thomas?
I feel like I'm not sure. Like,
okay.
I maybe like have a house here, but not like as a retirement. Maybe I would like it, but
Dude, retirement.
Wow.
How old are you, man?
Yeah. Hold up a minute. Retirement.
No,
wow.
but like I know my parents, they want to get like a house here or get into some property, but
right.
I feel like, which is a good idea because then I can always just come and visit here. And I feel like I really like Spain, but I feel like as in where to work, I feel like it would be somewhere else in Europe,
right.
mostly. But I would try to stay close to here. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I think all three of you have mentioned even living abroad and trying somewhere else. You know, that's incredibly daunting. But I think the idea of trying somewhere else, you know, for me, doing an Erasmus in France and then in Barcelona really, you know, it opens your eyes and it kind of it forces you to be autonomous, right? And standing on your own 2 feet is hard enough. Suddenly we kind of protect you and we're kind of there. But then when you go out into the real world, you know, you kind of see things like, you know, even remember looking for a house in Barcelona, thought I found one and then walked in and it's like, yeah, no, this would be your room and this is where my mother sleeps. And I was like, excuse me, I do not want to be, I was, you know, 20. I don't want to be sharing a room with a 80-year-old woman, you know, and I didn't get that. But then those are kind of things you learn from, you know, the different experiences that you have had. In terms of then, you know, going abroad or after that, have you thought a little bit more about where you would like to go? Because if not Spain, then where? Even just to study or to try living somewhere else, where would you like to go?
Well, for me, the UK.
The UK?
Yeah. Like I grew up there and I liked it there. Just, I think that's where it is for me.
Okay. All right. Boys?
For me, I think it's there's nothing for sure, but more probably I'm going to go to Holland, like my brother.
Right.
There's lots of good universities there, and the prices are not bad, so it's good.
Okay. Thomas?
I'm honestly not sure. Like,
Yeah?
I know, because a lot of it depends on my job, and since being a pilot is mostly depending on like where you're based,
Right.
and companies have different bases in different countries, so I'm not really I'm not closing off any doors.
Good.
So, and I know that any part of Europe I'm mostly like okay with going to.
Right.
So I feel like as long as it's in Europe, I'm more than happy. But I don't have any like specific choice.
Fair enough. Okay, so talking of, you mentioned bases there. I grew up most of my life on military bases because of my dad's job, and obviously I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that I was born in Germany, and that's on my passport. But then because I've moved around a lot, I don't really know when someone says to me, where are you from? What's your hometown? Who are you? Which, you know, not to get metaphysical or anything like that, but, you know, I'm like, I don't know. I've got no idea.
Well, I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because one thing's nationality, one thing's where you live, and one very different thing is identity.
Right.
And I never had one until I was maybe even close to my 30s when I traveled around and came back to Spain. And even then, it took me 3 or 4 years to get it properly into the Spanish culture. And now I can probably say I'm 80% Spanish. You know, if somebody asked me, I'll say I'm Spanish. Until then, I would say, I have no idea.
Yeah.
You know? And to avoid having to say, that's what I said, because otherwise the option was, well, my father's Nicaraguan, my dad's Spanish,
right.
And I just didn't want to say that. So I just said,
see, I go down, you know, I'm European. Regardless of Brexit, which was a complete mess, but that's for another podcast, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm European, because I think that encapsulates enough of, like, you know, where I've lived and where I've grown up. But do you guys have a set idea if somebody was like, okay, go?
I'm curious about Prem, because Prem, you were born here, you've lived in Spain all your life, and you're very deeply into the Indian culture. So what's your take on this?
I mean, my go-to is generally I'm Spanish, but as they see me, I always say I have an Indian background.
Right.
Because when I say I'm Spanish, they always look at me like a bit weird, like they expect something more. Right. You know? So.
But how do you feel? I mean, do you feel Spanish? When you look around you and you wake up in the morning, you say, I want to have a tapa, or I want to have a...
Una paella.
Okay, that's cool. That's interesting.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, I've adopted all of the Spanish culture. I've grown here. I have all the aspects. So, yes, I would consider myself Spanish.
It's funny because you're in the same position I was, except my parents aren't both from the same culture, but I never felt Spanish. My mom was Spanish, and we had Spanish food at home. My mom's side of the family is from Malaga and Antequera and that, so we're all Spanish, but I never really felt Spanish at all. In fact, I always thought in English. Now I'm bilingual when I think, but I always thought in English until I was like 30 or something. Wow. And at home I spoke with my brothers and sisters, I spoke in English. With my parents I spoke Spanish. And And my father's Nicaraguan's roots were so strong that he always just tried to make us be Nicaraguan. Never made that either. You know, I never felt Nicaraguan. Never been to Nicaragua, so there's nothing much to feel there. But I never felt Spanish either. I'd never had that identity until now.
Yeah, I mean, my identity is not fixed. Like, I have all aspects of Indian culture as well. I eat Indian food in my house every day. I go to Indian festivals. There's temples also that I adopted many aspects or all of them of both cultures. So to say I'm Spanish or to say I'm Indian, I don't know. I really.
All right.
But if they ask me, I've been born here, so I'd say I'm Spanish.
I don't think you realize how privileged you are, because both cultures, the Spanish and the Hindu cultures, are so incredibly rich. You probably have a really particular way of thinking without even realizing it. Because you're just full of culture, philosophy, everything, you know, spirituality, it's all there. It's all there, as well as, you know, your everyday customs.
Right.
You're pretty lucky there.
Yeah. Makes you very well-rounded. So obviously you are very clear with that kind of side of your identity. Thomas, Sofia, what about you two?
Well, my parents are Slovak, so then people might try to tell me I'm Slovak, but I've never lived there. I speak at home. When it's my whole family, we speak Slovak. When it's just my mum, we speak Hungarian, and then with my brothers, we speak English.
Right.
We follow Slovak traditions and stuff, but I just feel English myself, because I think in English. I grew up in England, and I just feel really English.
Okay, that's cool. Thomas?
I feel like I'm just Argentinian.
Okay.
I've adapted many parts of its culture. I drink mate, I eat all the food from Argentina, and I'm very close to my family in Argentina, and I feel like if somebody asks me, I'll just give them I'm Argentinian, and then if I'm getting to know them or something, I will tell them oh yeah, but I moved away immediately. I lived in here and here.
Right.
And I know for example at home, my little sister, she speaks in English with me all the time.
Wow.
Even if I respond to her in Spanish, she'll be oh yeah, but then this in English. And so she on the contrary is very English.
Yeah.
She tries to speak English and everything. And I feel she was born in Bahrain, and so and my mom also enforces her to speak English and all that, because it's nice to have, you know, if I had the level of English that she has at her age, I feel I would also be in the same position as her. But yeah, I feel if anybody asks me, I'm Argentinian.
Okay.
And I like that.
No, that's cool. That's cool. I want to do something a bit rogue now, and I think she'll hate me for doing this. Erica, could you come and join? Because I think
that was exactly what I was about to do.
Yes! Right! Good, we're on the same wavelength.
No need to move, Erica.
Yeah, this is exciting. We're now hearing from one of our lovely, tech team. And she's going to kill me for this, but I think it's hilarious.
Okay.
So, Erica, what is your identity?
I just see myself as being Swedish. If anyone ever asks me where I'm from, or I just say I'm Swedish, and if they have any other questions, then I'll happy to answer that. But yeah, I don't look very Swedish, so
right.
Obviously I have to say I have family from Japan, and I think that's it. I don't think I am anything else. I know I'm Finnish as well. Technically I'm Finnish, but I don't speak Finnish. I have barely been to Finland. I don't speak Spanish. I don't think I'm Spanish at all, but I might look Spanish. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but yeah, that's it. I think that's my identity.
Did you find that ease? That quite apart from the fact that we put you on the spot, surprise. Did you find that easy to come to that decision, or that to give us that answer?
I don't think it's anything I've ever really thought about.
Right.
I just when I'm in Sweden, that's when I feel kind of at home.
Right.
I would say. I mean, obviously, I've lived here in Spain for quite a while, so I think when I come back from Sweden or from any other country, I think this is also a part of my home. But I don't feel Spanish at all. So in that aspect, I think Sweden is my home, and that's where I grew up. I speak Swedish at home, so.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, and I'm not
You're
even
welcome.
sorry. That was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. That's something different. So, with your guys and your identity, how do you feel then? You know, when people question and they tell you what your identity is. So, Prem, maybe in your case, they're like, well, no, you know, you mentioned earlier that people look at you when you say you're Spanish and they're like, oh, no, there has to be something else. Or Sofia with the idea that, you know, because of your last name, it's like, well, that's not an English last name. You know, or Thomas, in your case, because you've moved around, it's like, no, you're not one of us, right? How do you feel when your identity is questioned from what you feel it is?
Actually, I've gotten very used to it because since I was small, they've always looked at my surname or looked at me. They needed like some kind of further explanation.
Right.
Like, you're Spanish, but there's something more to it.
Right.
And for me, it's something normal now. Like, if I have to like sign in a gym membership or whatever, they look at my surname. It's like, oh, that's very curious. Where you're from? Or like Spain. But you know, my grandparents are from India, and you know, it's always been a part of my life. I've gotten used to it.
All right. Sofia, Thomas, what do you think?
Well, when people question like my surname, for example, well, I've always had like friends who are also like immigrants to the UK. So I had loads of friends from like Polish friends or like Indian friends, and then like I'd also have had English friends, but I just felt like I kind of understood we understood each other with the fact that we're not like, I guess, as English as everyone else.
Right.
But I don't know. It's like a difficult question because I do get upset when someone tells me something like I don't know, like I said one time I said something like, oh, it's really cold outside, and someone said, oh, you should be used to it because you're from Slovakia, but I've never lived there.
Right.
You know, it's like sometimes it does upset me because I am English, or like when I pronounce something a bit different to how you were supposed to pronounce it. Yeah. But yeah.
Okay, Thomas.
I feel like I haven't really had many encounters where people have questioned me, because mostly like if they ask me in Spanish, I open my mouth and they immediately hear the accent.
Right.
And so like, oh, okay, you're Argentinian. But I do know that, like, for example, I might have the accent, but it's very like wasted. And so sometimes they might speak to me and I might not understand some terminology, and they'll be like, oh, but you're Argentinian, you should know what that means. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's kind of what I have left from my parents, and
right.
Of course they don't speak in the same way that they would speak in Argentina. So I feel like sometimes it doesn't severely upset me, but it's like, oh man, I wish I like was more Argentinian. But yeah, I just haven't really taken it into account. I just kind of move on with it.
Okay. And weird question now. What language do you think and dream in?
That was a good one. I was thinking of that when we were talking about what we speak at home.
Right.
But I feel like before I used to think a lot in English.
Okay.
But now it's like in between, you know? Like sometimes if I'm like already speaking in Spanish, I'll just be thinking in Spanish.
Right.
And most of the time it's in Spanish. But sometimes it's just like I think I dream in English.
Right. Of course.
But yeah.
I think the giveaway is, what language do you swear in?
Yes.
That's really.
But then, I don't know. I swear in Spanish. Spanish comes a lot more naturally. I think it's a lot more as a language. It's much more passionate, and it's kind of,
Right.
you know, there's no kind of, and swear words are kind of in common.
Right. So you don't think there's a relationship between what language you swear in and what language you think in?
Right, I do, because I think for something like most of the stuff I would obviously think in English, right? But then for swearing, I think it's much more. Spanish is much more colourful.
More descriptive, isn't it?
It's more descriptive, and I think English is much more...
There's more choice.
Right, and English is much more shocking when you swear,
Yeah.
right? It's kind of like, you know, whereas in Spanish it's kind of like, oh, they use the swear word, okay, fine, you know.
I'm very used to swearing here in Spanish.
Right, which I love, because I think, you know, it's a way of showing emotion, which, you know, in English, I don't know if you'd agree, Sophia, emotion's not really something that would come naturally in everyday speech, but... I don't know. So what languages do you think dreams swear in?
Well, I think and dream in English, but I have been known to sleep talk in Hungarian.
Ah, wow. Now that is cool, right? That is cool. Prem?
Me, always in Spanish, but actually these past few years, there's been the slight occasion where I've thought in English.
Right.
But like I don't talk much Indian in my house. Like, it's mostly Spanish. Maybe when I go to my grandparents' house, then I talk Indian there, but it's mostly Spanish. So 95% Spanish, maybe on some occasions English.
And have you guys coming here to Sunnyview encountered any, not language barriers, but within your social groups? Not necessarily within the, in the classroom, because obviously English is the language we use, unless it's in like there's a Spanish lesson or a French-German lesson. But have you encountered any language barriers or any kind of separation from, depending on what language you speak as your first language?
I think so. I mean, I know, for example, with Raul, he's very Spanish, and so he mostly chooses to talk in Spanish. And so when we're like in the group or like playing poker or something, he's like talking in Spanish. Roy or Erica, even sometimes it's like they might not like understand what's going on, and so I feel like in that way it's can act as a barrier sometimes,
right?
Because it's like almost unfair that some of us can understand but not everybody,
right?
But yeah.
Sometimes I would get like where I'm in a classroom and we talk in English, but then the teacher might say a joke in Spanish or something, or like a Spanish word, which everyone finds hilarious, but I don't understand the joke, and it's just a bit awkward. But then there's also sometimes like cultural differences. Like I make a reference, which in England would have been like the funniest thing ever, and everyone just looks at me like, "What are you talking about?"
Right. No. I've definitely been there. And it's awful when a joke does not land, and you just kind of stand there and you're like, "Oh God, I'm not funny." No. And then you want to melt on the spot. No. So can definitely relate. Prem?
For me, it's actually never been a problem. Always, all my friends, they've all talked Spanish, or if anybody has incorporated into the group, they've talked English. So always Spanish or English has never been a problem because everybody understands Spanish, and if they not, we try and make the most and speak English. And for example, Marcus, he's come this year. He's a new student, and he starting to understand Spanish, but when we're around him, we try to speak in English so that he can understand what we're saying. But sometimes if we speak Spanish, we realize and we try to switch to English,
Okay, that's interesting. Albert, what is your go-to then? Like your
English.
English.
Yeah.
Your English is your go-to.
Think in English,
Yeah.
dream in English, unless there's Spanish characters in the dream, and I think we just communicate in Spanish.
Yeah.
But I think in English mostly.
Oh, that's interesting.
I swear in Spanish though.
Yeah, right.
Just like you, yeah.
It just does it much better. It just does it.
It sounds more natural.
Right, it really does. It really does. And I think, there's that, in English, swearing particular as language is seen as, oh no, we don't do that, and it's saved for certain occasions, whereas in Spain it's like, look, if you've got to say something, say it.
Just say it.
Say it, which I really...
It's more honest.
It is much more honest. Erica, oh wow, hello.
Well, I thought I would just answer also that question.
Yes.
And I do, like I said before, I speak Swedish at home, and I think and dream mostly in Swedish, but I don't think I've ever said any swear words in Swedish, in my life. I don't think I've ever, because I just feel really awkward if I were to swear in front of my parents.
Right.
And I usually only speak Swedish to my parents, or my brother, but I do sometimes swear in English. Occasionally. Well, we're not hiding. All the truth is coming out today. But I feel a bit awkward when I speak Swedish to any other person except from my family. Right. Because I feel like it's really boring, the language, compared to because I feel like compared to a person my age in Sweden, I think my vocabulary isn't as great. Right. So when I go to Sweden and I speak to other people, I feel a bit awkward because I feel like I'm more limited to what I can say. When in English, I can express myself much better. And I can actually say exactly what I want to be said. And
yeah, I get that a lot as well. Where when I go to Slovakia, both my parents and grandparents, they live in villages, and I just can't communicate with the village children because I don't I understand what they're saying, but I don't really know what to add to that or what to say more because I don't kind of get them in the same way. But when I'm speaking with my parents, sometimes I don't know the word in Slovak, and I don't think about it. I just immediately just say the English word and then just move on, or kind of make a mash of English Slovak word. But I can't do that when I'm talking to my grandparents because they don't speak English, and I have to think about more what I'm saying. So I just feel like it's more difficult to talk to people but even though I'm fluent, but I just not, I don't know how to explain. Like,
occasionally there might be some words.
yeah,
yes.
like.
Do you find that stops? Do you find sometimes when you do communicate with other people in your environment that, you know, the choice of language does stop you, or it does impede you kind of getting to know that person then?
Yeah, sometimes I, like, my family have, like, for example, political arguments, and I want to, like, say what I want to say.
Right.
But I just can't, like, say it, like, because I don't talk about, like, politics in Slovak enough with my parents that I know the right kind of vocabulary for that.
Okay. And then in terms of people at school, if they're using kind of a language that, you know, is not your first or you're not as comfortable with, do you feel that would that put you off maybe developing a friendship with that person at all?
I don't think so. I mean, if there's one language that we can both understand each other in, then I think that's more than enough. But
Right.
I feel like where it would come in is if they directly don't speak like a language that I know, because I only know Spanish and English.
Right.
So if it's neither of those two, then we've got a problem. But
Yeah, but then never say only speak Spanish. The fact that you speak two languages or any more languages, like
It's funny that how we just take it for granted here.
Right, and it's not. It's something that should be celebrated, particularly within English-speaking cultures. You know, they suffer from monolingualism and the idea, oh, everyone speaks English, which is wrong. You know, and I think Sofia and you might have lived that firsthand a bit more when you were back in the UK.
Yeah.
The idea of how languages are viewed in Europe, I suppose, are slightly different, right? So always celebrate that.
Like in Spanish lessons, for example, in England, people wouldn't even be trying to get the accents. They'd be like, "Hola, me llamo Josh y vivo en un casa." Like they don't even try with the accents and stuff like this.
Right. So, and I think that's something great here that should be celebrated, because the language brings you different cultures and it brings you different perspectives. I think, you know.
I mean, I also feel like, for example, when I said only, I feel like that's also because not only have I gotten used to it, and for me it feels normal, but also I know that, for example, in Abu Dhabi when I was in school, nobody like really like cared. So like if they said if I'm like, oh, I'm Spanish, they're like, oh, okay, cool. And then they just like, even if I had Spanish friends or anything, we would still speak in English. Like everything would be like work around in English. And I know we took Arabic class as well, but it wasn't like anything. Even the teachers didn't put effort into like trying to teach us the diversity.
Right.
So I feel like that's a part that kind of made me not care as much. But I do know that like it is quite special.
Okay, that's interesting.
I have a question for mostly the audience, seeing as here at the table we're all multicultural. Is there anybody here that isn't? Somebody, I know we all live in Spain, so we're all foreigners in Spain.
No,
but is there anybody here that like the opposite of the Muggles? What is it, like a purebred or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. A pedigree.
Huh?
A pedigree?
A pedigree?
I don't know. That makes it sound like a dog. No.
Behind me, maybe?
Behind you, mate? Oh.
Definitely not.
Definitely
And actually,
not.
you're part Canadian, no? Jess? You were
Yeah.
born in Canada, right?
I was born in Canada. I grew up in the States. I lived for a short time in the UK, and then I've lived here most of my life now.
This is exciting. This is what I really like, because everyone has an interesting backstory, and I think it's a cultural melting pot, really. And you kind of learn so much from other people, and it's really interesting what develops from that, even like the language or the way that, you know, you talk to each other. And I think, you know, shows that you can really, you know, access conversation with anyone as if you try. And this pretty much exemplifies it, I think.
Yeah. I really like here how like there's so many different cultures, because like in England, like everyone was just like, I'm English. Someone like the most exotic person would have had like a grandma from Devon or something.
Yeah.
You know, it was like you'd get a couple people that weren't English, but it was mostly just English. But then here it's like, oh, I'm from here, but I was born here and then I lived here, and it's just like so many different like combinations.
I mean, we're in a room and we could not find a single person that was not multicultural.
Yeah, exactly. But then this room itself is essentially an anomaly, right? Because you know, as Sofia said, and I suppose if we were to go, I don't know, to a different school, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. We would definitely be seen as, not necessarily, we would be seen as outsiders, essentially, be like, oh, you're not from here, you know, and it would kind of be obvious, right? So I think we're lucky in that respect, to be honest.
I think so. And I think most of you will probably realize how lucky you are once you leave the nest and become independent and start meeting people around there. You'll see what difference is taking for granted that you're living in a multicultural environment.
Yeah, I feel like we have like a very protected environment here in Sunnyview.
We do, yeah.
Very protected.
Not necessarily good all the time, but
exactly.
But it does.
A bubble.
It's a little bubble. It teaches you, but you have to go out to the world to actually experience it and to see what the big difference is. And it's good, normally good.
That is some sage advice.
Yeah.
I'd say the same. You've got to go out and experience things, even if you don't like it, and you can say, look, I've done it.
And our audience wants to say something.
No, I just had a thought. I was just going to say that even though it is kind of like a bubble, I feel like it's good in the sense that you learn to understand what it should be like. So later on, if you're in that outside world and you are being treated differently or the experiences are just different, at least you have something to compare it to where you know how it should be, and you won't accept something that's not right. So I feel like that's a positive side of it.
Totally.
Right. And that was Elsa, by the way, and it was her idea for this multicultural podcast, so thanks to her for sure.
American Spanish, right?
Yeah, American Spanish. So I think we're coming closer to the end. I'd like, if it's okay with Albert, to end by asking our guest today either something that, you know, has stuck with you that you've learned about the people that you've lived here, or something that you've realised maybe today, or something about, you know, being multicultural that's important to you. A final thought to leave our lovely audience and our viewers and people listening at home. What would you say? I know it's a very deep and difficult question, right? You know?
I think maybe the first point would be that how, again, like Albert and you said, is that how fortunate we are and how lucky we are to be multicultural, and also how like before this I wouldn't really have thought about it this much, and so it's kind of like opened my eyes more to like how I wish I would have been more open in a way to thinking more about it, or understanding that it is important and not just neglected. Yeah, it's interesting.
I think you've all made me think more on my Indian side, because I've always considered myself very Spanish, although I look Indian, but like talking about so much Indian stuff that like I take for granted, it's like normal to me. Like it's made me realize that I'm much more Indian than I thought.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Sofia?
Yeah, I agree with Prem, but also just that everyone is like different, and you know, you might look at them and see that you might look like one thing, but then you like learn about their background and that they're like all sorts of different things. I really like that here, that, you know, everyone is like different in their own way.
Yeah, we don't judge books by their cover, you know. We're an interesting group of people, right?
I agree. I think if there's one takeaway from this is tolerance. I think
Absolutely.
How seamless and how easy it is to be tolerant when you grow up in a multicultural environment, because that's what there is. You know?
Yeah, definitely. Very lucky, and it's nice, right?
It is very nice.
Everybody has a story.
Exactly, everyone does have a story. Everyone does have a story, and it's worth listening to. It's worth listening to, because you might learn something about yourself.
All right, I think this brings us to the end. Pretty much, guys. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks as usual to our techies, Erica and Jess. Canadian, Japanese, Swedish. And thank you to our audience. Didn't say much today.
They are a first-time audience, so, you know, maybe next time, right?
Next time for sure. You'll be here. Anyway, as usual, thanks a lot for coming. This is Sunnyview School. Come join us. All right. A little clap.